North Korea is yet to comment on South Korea and Cuba's announcement over the forging of official diplomatic ties, but it's continuing to bring Russia closer to its diplomatic circle. We turn to Stephen Noerper this morning. Welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
Good morning. So, no commentary from the North on South Korea-Cuba ties. What do you think the reason is?
Well, clearly there's issues about Cuban recognition that concerns them. They have a long history with Cuba. They've exchanged on medical and scientific fronts, and clearly they've been a strong political ally of Cuba. However, that said, I think we should look at this as something of a win-win. This is very important for South Korea. Clearly, it moves us forward in terms of diplomatic relations. South Korea enjoys relations now with over 190 nations. Cuba is a very interesting place to be. I went on the first flight commercially out of New York to Havana under President Obama, and that opening was fascinating. There's much to do there for South Korea, including what you've highlighted in your report by way of investment in telecommunications and other economic exchange. And South Korean tourists will find it a fascinating place. Cuban people, culture, and music fascinating and a very interesting opportunity for South Korea. That said, there may also be opportunities we're not thinking about, which means maybe there's a potential for communication. And if we do get back to inter-Korean dialogue at any point, perhaps commonality over Cuba may help. There are other countries that enjoy relations with both Pyongyang and Seoul, namely Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia is the closest. And that has balanced out very well in the years, and perhaps there's a soft confidence that can be built over time. So it's an important move forward for both Seoul and Havana.
All right, but in the meantime, the North Korea's Rodong Shinmun over the weekend reported its delegation's visit to Russia for an international conference there in detail. They reported that. That's the North's way of showing off its close ties with Russia, isn't it?
Oh, clearly, and that's from a North Korean perspective tantamount. I mean, what they're trying to mark since the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Putin near Vladivostok is really a close relationship, and they're signaling that constantly. The North Korean Foreign Minister Che was in Moscow. There are reports that potentially Putin could visit Pyongyang, and they're trying to shore up those ties. Just today, the Wall Street Journal had a report about Russian tourists to North Korea. But look, that's happening at the cultural level and the people-to-people exchange level. Both states find themselves fundamentally weak and isolated, economically weak, diplomatically isolated. So we should be careful not to overplay these ties. It's an opening which we should monitor, especially by way of our concerns about munitions, about KN-23 missiles in Ukraine and the interference in terms of Russian aggression there, especially on a weekend when we mark the sad demise of Alexei Navalny, and remember that there are human rights concerns both around North Korea and around Russia. And so Pyongyang-Moscow ties are an area of concern, but ones we also need to keep in perspective.
Definitely. And a day after South Korea and Cuba announced their official forging of diplomatic ties, the leader Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong said a summit between Pyongyang and Tokyo can be on the table under certain conditions. Now, the question is, how likely is it to actually happen? I mean, will South Korea let Japan do that?
It's a possibility, and there have been many times in the past when Japan and North Korea have tried to broach relations, and they haven't materialized as recently as 2013, 2014. There was progress around 2000, 2002, but that was a very different day, and the ties were much warmer by way of inter-Korean relations as well. So it's something that Prime Minister Kishida is interested in. It helps him in terms of his domestic legitimacy. He's hurting in the polls. He's looking at a September LDP vote and wants to maintain control. And so he thinks it's an important step forward for him domestically. Of course, there are tremendous tremendous questions about coordinating that with Seoul. But I think we need to trust the trilateral relationship among the United States, Japan, and Korea. And again, look perhaps for opportunities. Is there a communications corridor that could be opened? Is there confidence that might be built in terms of a Japanese dialogue that takes place with North Korea? That said, Kim Yo-jong warned against either the abductee issue or nuclear and missile issues being brought up. Those would certainly be at the fore of Kishida's concerns. Abductee issues are very important in Japan, and clearly the missile and nuclear issues and concerns about North Korea are in the region's window, and certainly a concern among the United States, Japan, Korea, and the international community.
Right, like you mentioned briefly, the trilateral relationship between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, that seems to be growing only stronger, while North Korea, Russia, and China appear to be struggling to do the same. Is that so? I mean, the trilateral cooperation between that three seems quite questionable at this point, isn't it?
Right. Well, conventionally, people are talking about two blocs, but I would be very careful not to overstate the relationship among Russia, North Korea, and China. I think China is more distant in this triangle. I think they're concerned about the Russian carrying cost and about Russian activity in terms of its aggression against Ukraine. They've certainly been taken aback by international reaction, by sanctions and the potential economic input, and that may be affecting their thinking on Taiwan. Russia and North Korea certainly getting closer together, and that warrants concern. That said, they're not in the same complex that the United States, Japan, and South Korea are. That trilateral relationship has democratic values at its base. It has very, very active economic exchange in terms of the first, third, and 10th largest economies of the world working together. And there's much more that draws together the United States, South Korea, and Japan in good and positive ways, which means a durability that simply isn't there at this time relative to China, Russia, or North Korea.
All right. Thank you, as always, for your insight. You enjoy the rest of your weekend there.
Thank you. Aloha from Hawaii and all the best.